Thank you, Rachel, and all the other members of the Scottish Youth Parliament. We don't have anything like that in the U.S., so this was a revelation to me, and it's really wonderful. I did go to one of the sessions yesterday where they presented, and I think it's a glorious concept, and you guys represent it very well. I do want to prepare you for my style. It's, I don't know if it's anomalous, but I'm going to do it by reading part of the preamble of the book that was just mentioned, You Can't Teach Through a Rat, because it says it pretty clearly. Whenever I provide professional development to educators, or anyone for that matter, I routinely tell, or should I say warn, the participants that I have three broad goals: to inform, to inspire, and to disconcert. The first goal is ubiquitous, and the second common. But the last, to disconcert, is anomalous and hence takes most people by surprise. However, just as weightlifters and bodybuilders claim no pain, no gain, developmental psychologists, and I am a developmental psychologist, that's my training, can argue that there is no development without conflict and discomfort. That is admittedly a bit of an overstatement, but the point is that entering your discomfort zone is often necessary to make substantial progress. So I intentionally will find ways to get some people in here to enter their discomfort zones. So let me, hopefully this is, it is there. I did change the title. I apologize for that. But as I thought more and more about what would be the most useful thing to do here, I decided to give an overview of the world of character education through the eyes of at least this particular developmental psychologist. And I was really heartened yesterday to hear one of the speakers use this exact phrase. I was the only one that used this up, as far as I knew up till now, so others are understanding this in the same way as me. For me, character education is not a program, it's not a curriculum, it's not a set of lessons, it's not a particular class or course. It is a way of being. And as a character education consultant, advisor, my goal is to change the way you be. Sorry for butchering the English language, but I'm doing it on purpose. I want educators to be differently. Can you find a different way to be? How do you be with all the people who are constituents in your school? The students, the professional teachers, the non-professional staff, the parents, the community members who have a vested interest in whether you succeed or fail at positively impacting the character of the students and pupils in your schools. Certainly law enforcement, local business owners, all have a vested interest in whether the students come out of your schools with good character or come into their places of business trying to steal or disrupt, go into the community trying to create havoc, or do they go out there trying to do good? They all are stakeholders. Can you be differently with them? And for most educators, it is a new way of being, at least in the US, because I don't know well enough what's done in the UK or particularly in Scotland. But at least in the US, we do not train our educators to be in the ways I want them to be in ways that both lead to academic achievement and the psychological flourishing of children, particularly in moral ways. And I'll get back to that in a moment. And it is rocket science. This is not easy stuff. I've been doing this for too long, and I know what happens when you try to get most educators to grasp the depth of effective character education. They find a superficial understanding of it and invest heavily in that, and essentially are ineffective. I've come to the conclusion that educators come to education for deeply good reasons. because they care about children and their futures. They care about their learning, and they care about the people that they will become. But because they have no idea what produces those outcomes, they end up using ineffective methods and sometimes counterproductive methods. So that original title, The Science of Character Education, was because I see myself, at least in large part, as a purveyor of the scientific wisdom upon which effective practice should be built and can be built. What works is a much simpler way of saying that. And we've been looking at what works for a long time. In the back of the room on the way out, you can grab, I put out 2 flyers. One is how to access the resources of our center. And much of it is about research evidence and the lessons learned from research evidence. At the end, I have a few slides on that. And the other one is about a journal that we put out, also to try to get the research evidence out there, but also the voices of practitioners. The forthcoming issue of our journal has an article by a secondary math teacher in Ohio in the United States who was a brilliant innovator of how to integrate character education into the math classroom. And then the U.S. government came in with their new approach to education, the Common Core, and he lost his way. And he said he got so obsessed with how can he redo his math curriculum to fulfill these new requirements that he started dropping the brilliant innovations of integration of character education with academics. And he watched his classes unravel around him, the behavior and the academic achievement. And he did a mea culpa, and he said, I've lost my way, and he wrote a piece for this journal. So we do have practitioner pieces in the journal also, and there's a flyer in the back about that as well. It is rocket science. It's hard. It's not easy. I love this quote. Paul Houston is the former executive director of what is essentially the national professional organization for school district leaders. We call them superintendents. Okay. And he was a very daring and very bright man who would take on the sacred cows when he saw something wrong out there. But he once said, schools are perfectly designed for the results we are getting. If we don't like the results, we need to redesign schools. There's an old definition of insanity. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, this is the antithesis to that. This is saying that if you don't like the results you're getting, not that they're horrible, they're just not good enough, you want more, then the first place you have to go is to design school, to redesign. And the scary part of this is that redesign starts in a very odd place if you're an educator or anybody else doing this. It starts in your bathroom, in your mirror. Because redesign starts with looking yourself in the face. Rachel said it nicely before. She didn't know what her character was. You have to figure out, you have to know yourself. Okay, it's an age-old nugget of wisdom. Know thyself. You have to know yourself first and then be willing to change yourself as an educator if you want to change your classroom or your school district. So this is the model I'm going to use today. And this was something I actually threw together almost on a lark or by some pressure years ago when I was asked to write a chapter for a book which I was helping to put together on advice to teachers and parents about what are the few things we know that really impact children's character. And then I realized I had to write a chapter. I said, oh my gosh, what am I going to write? I can't distill it down to a few things. So eventually I did, and I came up with these 5, which really work really nicely here because we speak English. But when I do this in other countries, and when I go to Asia, they don't even have an alphabet, so it's like, forget the whole idea of this. I just tell them, forget the word prime, just remember the 5 bullets and don't worry about the rest of it. But at least for you, prime can be a mnemonic device. So I'm going to go through these one at a time and try to give you some concrete examples to give you a sense of the macro picture of how to be as a school, as a classroom, as an educator, in ways that research tells us actually impacts character. But I want to do a little thought experiment with you quickly just to frame this. Okay, so I'm going to ask you now to think about the one thing that you like to think about more than anything else in the world. Yourself. Think about yourself. And here's what I want you to think about yourself. Think of one aspect of your character that you think is a strength. You're particularly caring, or particularly honest, or particularly reliable, or whatever it happens to be. You're not going to share it with anybody else in here, so you can drop the humility problems and everything else. Just think for yourself, if your best friend were to describe you to somebody who hasn't met you yet, what would you hope they would notice about you and tell others? What is a character strength? Now that Rachel's done her analysis of her character, you can think of something, okay? And so settle on one. What is one thing? And again, you're not going to share it, so just pick whatever is true. And now here's the second question. How did you, excuse me, how did you end up being like that? What caused you to be that way? If you're particularly caring, where did the caring come from? If you're particularly honest, where did that come from? And think for a moment, really, about what was the source of that? Let me ask a few of you to volunteer to tell us what was the source. You don't even have to tell us what the character trait was if you don't want to. Just tell us what influenced you to be that way. What led you? Who wants to share? Anybody? Go ahead. Family? What about the family? What did they do? Okay, so this was a fundamental belief in your family, and you learned it. Somebody else? What about the family? So she modeled it for you. Okay, where did it come from? So people around you also had that. Okay, you getting the picture? The picture is this. If you want children to develop character strengths, you have to bottle that which actually impacts enduring character in children. Nobody in here raised their hand and said, it was a lesson that I learned in school. It was a poster I saw on a wall. It was a reward I got for a good behavior in school. It was a recognition I got when they called me up on stage to say I had the responsibility of the month. Let me do this one more way. Remember I said I was going to disconcert you? Hang on. How many of you have children? Okay, so I want you to think about the fact that, assumedly, all of you want your children to develop good character, right? You didn't want your children to become predators who end up incarcerated for the rest of their life, right? You want your children to have good character. So I want to ask you, which of these things did you do with your children to help them have good character? How many people in here went out and spent your hard-earned money on posters that just had one word on them? Things like respect, responsibility, caring, and plaster them around your household. Anybody do that? So there's one. Okay, we got one. Thank you for the honesty. Anybody in here start every day in your family by reading out a pithy quote about character, preferably through a disembodied speaker in the ceiling of one of your rooms? Anybody do that one? Sometimes people will read scripture or some quote like, oh, no? All right, let's try another. How many of you went out and made these cute little signs to rename the spaces in your house? Things like caring kitchen, benevolent bathroom, tactful toilet. Did you have those signs around your house? No. Okay, how many of you walked around your house with little slips of paper in your pocket, and every time your child did something good, you'd give them one, and at the end of the week, if they had 5 or 6 of them, they would get a pencil that sparkled and smelled like strawberries. Anybody do that one with your children? All right, I'll try one last one. How many of you convened your family every month to announce which member of your family had the best character that month? Any of you do that one? Gee, if that stuff's so powerful, why didn't you do it with your own children? Because you know it is not the deep, powerful stuff. You told me what is the deep, powerful stuff. It is the role models in your life. It is the values of people who are significant to you in your life. That's what we be in schools. Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. I say, be the character you want to see in your students. We're going to come back to that one. So let's talk about them one at a time. Prioritization. If character development is not a core priority for you as an educator, for your institution, your classroom, your school, your district, whatever level you're working at, it is not going to optimally flourish. It's not going to happen. It has to be an authentic priority. It has to be part of your mission, your purpose. The first chapter of my book is on purpose. That's what it's called. Because we have to start with the purpose. And education has at least a dual purpose of academic achievement, learning, flourishing, and psychological, moral character flourishing. And they are both there. In the U.S., we lost our way shortly after World War II. We forgot that purpose of education. And as much as, I understand that the UK was on a similar trajectory. I don't know as much about UK educational history. But we certainly lost our way and got obsessed with the space race, with the Soviet Union, and everything had to be back to basics, core academics. We turned our schools into little engineering academies, and we started cutting out everything that was seen as soft, fluff, non-central, PE, arts, and character and values. We lost that way. We also had this fundamental belief, which was wrong, that we could extract character education from schools. So I want to tell you an important point right now. There is no off switch to character education. You cannot not do character education. Aristotle said it 2,000 years ago. If you are around children, you will impact their character. I would just prefer you do it intentionally, effectively, and positively, rather than doing it unknowingly and perhaps harmfully. But to believe you can opt out of impacting the values and character of children is a delusion. Cannot be done. So we don't have that option. I have a bunch of quotes up here. I'm not going to read you the quotes. Are we putting this online? Is this? Yeah, it's fine with me to put the slides online so you can get the whole thing. And you can always email me, and I will send you whatever you need. I'm happy to do so. This one, though, is so powerful, and a lot of people use this quote, but I will use it too. I've come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. My personal approach creates the climate. My daily mood makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child humanized or dehumanized. Every day, every adult, not just every teacher, every adult in a school leaves their mark on children. Some of those marks are temporary and wash away. Some of them are indelible, permanent, will be there for the rest of the child's life. Some of those, fortunately, are affirming, inspiring, uplifting marks that lead children to be the best they can be. But some are scars that will throb with pain for the rest of the child's life. I recall vividly doing an activity with educators in which I asked them to talk about the best teacher they ever had as a child. Actually, this activity is written up in my book as a lesson. The best teacher they ever had as a child, and then later the worst teacher they ever had as a child. And those worst teacher stories are most frequently about public humiliation. Humiliating me in front of others. It's okay to let a child know how frustrated, how angry, how disappointed you are with them, but you should not have an audience. That is devastating to a child. We had one teacher tell us a story of when she was a 7-year-old. It would be like your P2, P3, something. I get lost in that. But somewhere around there. When in about 5 seconds, a teacher humiliated her by putting her down in front of the class for something. And she was telling this story now as an adult, and she couldn't finish it because she started to weep from the pain of the scar. She was 57 years old. This was half a century later. That teacher probably did not remember the statement a half hour later. 50 years later, the wound throbbed so strongly she couldn't tell the story. If any of you out there as educators doubt your power, remember that story. You have awesome power over children. And in terms of priority, Teddy Roosevelt once said, to educate a person in mind and not in morals is to educate a menace to society. So it's not just a matter of not doing a serious job with character education, being incomplete. It is menacing. There are people all over the world, and we're well aware of them, who are trying to do horrendous harm to innocent others. I would rather they were illiterate, stupid, unmotivated. I don't want them being smart, literate people. I don't want a stalker coming after me who's a brilliant, educated person with evil motivations. I want them to be dumb and dumber, walking around going, I want to hurt Marvin Berkowitz. I forgot who that is. Let's get a pizza. That's who I want, stalking me. And this is the most powerful of all. I'm a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no person should witness. Gas chambers built by learned engineers, children poisoned by educated physicians, infants killed by trained nurses, women and babies shot and burned by high school and college graduates. So I'm suspicious of education. My request is help your students become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, educated Eichmanns. Reading, writing, arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more humane. I'm somewhat preaching to the converted here, so I won't belabor the point. I do want to make a point that the bulk of my time is spent training school leaders, principals, head teachers. I've been doing it for 16 years to great effect, and we're about to launch a blended learning version of our rather intensive year-long leadership academy in Taiwan through a grant from the HTC Foundation because they wanted to bring it to Taiwan. It's getting translated into Chinese now. Avis is part of this project. This focus on leadership is critical. I have never seen an excellent school without an excellent head teacher, excellent principal. Doesn't happen. You can be good without an excellent one. You can't be great. And a bad head teacher, a bad principal, and we all know they're out there, certainly will always destroy a school. So without that focus, that's the way we transform organizational way of being, not just individual way of being. Who out here is a head teacher? We got head teachers out here? We have none? No principals, no head teachers? Wow. Egads. We'll go back and reform yours. Be a rebel and change them. I'm not going to go through the details of this. I do want to say that the primary role of the head teacher, though, the principal, is focusing on staff development. That's the most important thing they have to do, the adult culture and the staff development. And I tell them all the time, if you get every teacher in your school to be excellent, you can sit in your office all day and play video games, and you will still have a great school. Your job is to make your teachers great. It's a servant leadership model. So that's the P, prioritization. It has to be authentic priority, school mission, school leadership. Character has to be understood as necessary. It's going to happen anyhow. You just want to do it well. The second part of prime is the R, relationships. These are the molecules from which we build great schools and build character. And you have to, and this is a key point, you have to be intentional and strategic about building relationships. And the second part of it is it has to be all relationships. It's not just student to student or teacher to student. It's teacher to teacher, head teacher to secretary, secretary to student, custodian and cook to teachers, parent to principal, parent to teacher, all of them. They all have to be strategically, intentionally nurtured. One of the things I had some schools doing is I had every classroom adopt an adult who works in the building who doesn't have a classroom. So this could be administrators, it could be clerical staff, it could be cooks, it could be specialists who teach art or music but don't have a class of students themselves, the counselors, the mental health professionals. Any adult who works in the building is adopted by a classroom. And they're told at the beginning of the year, you're an honorary member of our class. Come on in whenever you can. We know you can't come in frequently, you have a job to do, but periodically pop in. When we have special events, we'll invite you. We're doing our class play, we're going on a field trip, we're having a party. We find out your birthday, we throw you a surprise birthday party. You come in at the beginning of the year, and we interview and find out more about you, who you are, your family, and so on. We're trying to, this transforms school culture. One of the things I loved when we lived here, and my son went to Craigie Barnes Primary in Dundee, and he was a 9-year-old then, is we call it looping. That the students stayed together all 7 years of primary school and had only 2 teachers during that time. One teacher for 3 years, one for 4 years. That's sustained relationships within the students, teacher to student. There are many more ways to do this, but we need to do this. One of my favorite principles, Amy Johnson, says, if we don't build time in our calendar for relationship building, it won't happen. So she put in her calendar of the academic year structures, processes for building relationships. And her school, by the way, was an exemplary school in academics. Good character education is good education. We get the academic results by investing in character education. Don't have time to do this one, unfortunately. The major point is that these kids who come from horrendous families, horrendous neighborhoods, damaged goods, the one thing that tends to save them is a sustained, healthy relationship with some adult who's benevolent and says, I care about this kid. I got a whole chapter on this in the book. I don't have time to do it now, and this is part of it, which I really can't do. Be a sociologist. I've learned this very late in my career. Think sociologically. Think about the culture of your classroom, the culture of your school, the adult culture of all the adults who work in the building. You have to think in that macro way. How can we engineer a healthier culture here? And a lot of that falls on the head teacher, the principal. And I'm not going to say more about that other than adult culture is key. It is key. And there's a great study by Anthony Bright, goes back a ways, in which he found out that the culture of relational trust, that we trust each other who we're in a relationship with. We're talking about amongst the adults who work in the school. That culture of relational trust is one of the best predictors of academic success of students. It was a massive study. Bright and Schneider, there's a whole book about this. If you need the reference, just write to me and I'll send it to you if you can't find it. Bryk is B-R-Y-K. B-R-Y-K. So it's easy to find it because it's an unusual spelling. The I. Maurice Elias, who's an expert in social emotional learning, another person like Avis, who's in this Leadership Academy project that we're doing, and I are writing, it's like a 4-page laminated primer on character education and social emotional learning. And he just sent me a draft of it yesterday, yet another draft. It's bizarre. He keeps sending it to me when I'm in the UK. Last time I was working, I was in Birmingham at the Jubilee Center. And for people who haven't yet caught wind of the Jubilee Center, it is a massive, wonderful resource in the UK and in the world, but particularly in the UK. And there are people here, from the Jubilee Center. But I was there working on it. Now I show up in Scotland, and suddenly he sends me the next rendering. I don't know what it means. But I went through it, and I said I'm okay with all the changes except one. Because in it I had said, replace the rewards and recognitions in your school. with individual private affirmations, with role modeling, and so on. And the editor wanted to change replace with blend or mix or something like that. And I said to Maurice, I said, I'm drawing a line in the sand here. This one I'm going to fall on my sword for. We want these out of schools. Educators, for some reason, instinctively feel like they have to give kids tangible rewards, and ideally to do it with an audience. To say, Avis, you were just so kind today. Everybody, did you see how kind Avis was? You should all be like Avis. At this point, everybody hates Avis. She's uncomfortable. I'm killing the culture of my classroom. And I think I'm building character. Or we have these award assemblies where we bring Avis up on stage because she was the responsible kid of the month, right? And in our naive sense, we think all the pupils in the school are sitting there going, wow, I am suddenly inspired to be more like Avis Glaze, to be more responsible. I am rededicating. But no, you know what's happening? Her few authentic friends are proud for her. She's uncomfortable. Most of the kids in the audience are bored to death. And a bunch of them are sitting there going, Avis? Avis Glaze responsible? She copies my homework on the bus every morning. I hate this school. Or Avis is respectful. She calls me names and spits on me. I come to school every day trying so hard to be respectful and nobody notices. She did it once and she gets an award. I hate this school. That's what you're creating. And the research says that all these rewards and all this recognition are counterproductive and stop children from internalizing those core values, which is the point of the entire enterprise to begin with. It is counterproductive. So my elegant advice to you about rewards and recognition is the following. Stop it. That's it. Stop it. Replace it with individual affirmation. All I have to do is to go up to Avis, my pupil, put my hand on her shoulder and quietly say, Avis, I saw what you did. That was so kind. Keep it up. That's what makes this a great school. Really proud of you. No audience, no one else, walk away, and there's no collateral damage that we get from the other stuff. I wish I had more time, but I don't. So I'm going to skip to the last two, because I have to finish in 4 minutes. The M is for modeling. Okay. I already told you the Gandhi paraphrase. Be the character you want to see in your students. It does absolutely no good to profess the importance of character when the institution and the adults that populate the institution don't embody that. And if you think the students are not noticing it, you've got your head in the sand. Students notice everything you do and say. Educators live under this bizarre delusion that you all have a self-activating Harry Potter cloak of invisibility on you. And that when you want the children to see you, it automatically goes off. And you're visible as can be. And when you don't want the students to see you or hear you, it automatically clicks on and they don't hear what you say or see what you do. Pardon my language, but poppycock, folderol, nonsense. They see it all. Just ask them. One of the great failures, I'm going to get to that in the next one in a moment, in education, is we don't ask the students how they experience our schools. They have a brilliant window, not a perfect one, not the only one, but a brilliant window on what schools are actually like, and we never ask them. They can tell you in great detail who are the good teachers and who are the bad teachers, and what every teacher can do. Here's one radical idea I had a little while ago. I was in a primary school, one of my favorites, and a tragedy because the principal retired after 41 years as a brilliant educator, and they brought in a new principal who dismantled the brilliance of the school. Broke her heart, broke my heart. But when she was still there, she had a program program which we call Families, and there's many names for this, but it's, P1, 2P2, 2P3, 2P4, kids get together once a week or so with an adult to do character-related activities, relationship building, service activities, and so on. And so she wanted to empower the students. And so she had the oldest kids in this school were 11 years old, go down to the wing of the school where the little ones were to bring them to their families, because it was chaos, because every kid in the school is moving to a different room all at the same time when they did Families. So the little ones could get lost and frightened. So that was their job. And I came in the next year and I said, "How's it going, Karen?" And she said, "Well, we're doing something new." That wasn't enough of a challenge for the 5th graders. So I have the 4th graders, the 10-year-olds, doing that now. So I said, "What are the 11-year-olds doing?" She said, "They're teaching the lessons. They're teaching the character lessons." And they would prepare them the day before. I said, "How's it going?" And she said, "Let's go find out." So we went up to Jonathan Lee's 5th grade, P7 or whatever, classroom, and barged in and interrupted his lesson. And the principal said, I want to just ask the kids some questions for a moment. And we knew he'd be fine with that. He's a great teacher. And he said, "Sure." And she said to the kids, "How's it going teaching these character lessons?" And they said, "It's hard." She said, "You can't get little kids to do what you want to do. They don't listen to you." Yeah, it was brilliant stuff. They said, "We went on a field trip and this kindergartner fell asleep in my lap. I didn't know what to do." They were just charming. And so I decided to do my disconcerting, and I jumped in and I said, "Well, it sounds like you guys are learning a lot about being teachers." And they said, "Oh yeah, we're getting to be good teachers." And I said, "Do you have any advice for Mr. Lee, your teacher, about how he could be a better teacher than he already is?" Because it was 2 or 3 months into the school year already. And they were and I knew Jonathan Lee, I knew the teacher, I knew he'd be okay with this. I wouldn't do this with a stranger. But I knew he'd be fine. And so first they affirmed him. They said, "Here are the things you do that make school interesting, that helps us learn, helps us remember, helps us perform well on assessments." And then they started giving him advice about some of the things he does pedagogically that aren't working. And I realized at that point, every teacher, in every classroom, in every school, in every part of the world, should have this conversation halfway through the school year. Should sit and ask their students, "How am I doing? What can I do to be a better teacher?" I've done this now with 5-year-olds. With 5-year-olds. I was in a session, I think it was your session the other day, where people were saying, you have to be, secondary, you have to be this. Nonsense. I've seen 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds make changes in their community, suggest great ideas for changes in their schools. And these they didn't come up with anything profound, ultimately. What they came up with is more snacks and more playtime, But they were what I call empowered. So I want to skip to the last one now and quickly talk about the E, empowerment. We live in the UK, in the US, and other countries that may be represented here, in democracies. The greatest innovation in human governance that's ever come forward. And we all paraphrase the apocryphal, alleged quote from Churchill about democracy is the worst political system that humankind has ever concocted, except for all the others. Okay? It is the most brilliant experiment we've come up with. And our children are failing. Now, you just had a massive experiment in lowering the voting age. And I think that's a great natural experiment to see what happens with that. Okay? But, we have programs like Kids Voting, where we have primary school children as poll workers helping with elections, having their own mock elections. There was one school in South Carolina which taught as part of their curriculum voter registration to 8-year-olds, and then took the 8-year-olds into the secondary schools and let them loose in the cafeteria, going up to the students who are old enough to vote, the 18-year-olds, and registering them for vote, saying, "Are you registered to vote?" As little kids. So, no. "Well, let me help you," because they were experts, and they were, who could say no to these kids? So please don't underestimate what these kids can do. But our society is failing at socializing democratic citizens, because democracy doesn't grow on a tree. Democratic character doesn't grow on a tree. It has to be nurtured. And Dewey taught us a long time ago that you don't get democratic character by just teaching about character, by teaching about democracy. That's okay. We have to do that. Civics classes, that's good. But you get true democratic character the same way you told me you got your character, by experiencing the power of your voice in the common sphere, advocating for the common good. And we need to democratize our schools and classrooms. We need to empower people, particularly children, but also the support staff, the non-professional staff, the parents, and all the others, to be partners in this journey that is the future of our societies and the future of our world. George Benson wrote a long time ago, as a songwriter, "I believe that children are the future. It's not a matter of belief, it's a matter of fact. There's no future without children, the race dies out, and there's no moral future without moral children." And I'm going to close by saying I encourage those of you who are so shying away from the language of virtue or morality or ethics and so on, and trying to find other languages, get over it. It is a fundamental human need. We need to live in a moral world. We all want to live in a moral world. So own it and say it, because as I said at the very beginning, one of the key purposes of education is to shape the future of the world by shaping the character of our children. And I'm going to quote Avis, who said to me a long time ago, as a teacher, we are in the people-changing business. So go out there and change people for the better, and thank you all.